Hi everyone, happy Friday and welcome to today's immigration chat with me, attorney Lilian from Lily Legal, where we help our clients get green cards for themselves and their families using the US immigration law system. So today I want to talk to you about the red flags that makes USCIS suspect that your marriage may be fake. So you want to make sure that you avoid these red flags, or at least you're prepared for them in case you're in your interview and this comes up. You know how to react, you know how to respond to them. Okay, if you have any questions about this or anything else, you can book a time to speak with me by going to my website, lilylegal.com, or by calling my office at 508-443-1788. So I wanted to go through these red flags because I have seen so many people come to me after their interview, after they already have an issue with USCIS, and asking me how to fix this. So before you even get to there, I want to make sure that you know what these red flags are and you know how to react to it when it comes up. You know how to avoid it altogether. So we're gonna go right into it. The first red flag, because I know y'all don't want to wait forever for these red flags, so let's get into it. The first red flag is speaking different languages. And I'm not talking about, oh, you speak Spanish and English and your spouse speaks only Spanish. No, that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about your spouse speaks Spanish only and you speak Chinese only, and you two don't have a common language. Right? You don't have a shared language, and it's going to be hard for USCIS to understand how you communicate with each other if you don't have a shared language. So that is one of the first red flags that USCIS has. If neither of you speak the same language, USCIS is going to assume that there may be fraud there. So you want to, one, avoid it. If you can't avoid it, there are ways to make USCIS understand that you can have a shared language, you can have no shared language and still have a real marriage. So one of the things I've seen is people that communicate through Google Translate. So one person is learning, if one only speaks English and the other one only speaks Spanish, either the one of the spouses is learning the other one's language, and they can show the steps that they're taking to learn the language, and they show how they communicate through either Google Translate or those types of apps, so that they're able to communicate with each other even though they don't speak the same language. So it's really important that if you are in this situation where you don't have a shared language, that you are able to show USCIS how you're communicating, right? The methods that you're using to communicate with each other is really important to show here, because that's what USCIS is going to be looking at when this comes up. So to avoid this, show your work, show how you communicate. Okay. The next thing is big age gaps. Okay. So if one spouse is 60 and the other one is 18, USCIS is going to have huge red flags go off, especially if the 18-year-old is the one trying to get, either way, either the 18-year-old is trying to get status or is the one given the status. USCIS is going to have big red flags come up when there is a big age difference. If you're just joining me, hi, welcome. Ask me questions in the comments. That's what I'm here for. I am going over the red flags that USCIS sees in a case that makes them suspect that there may be marriage fraud in the case. So the first one I talked about is when two people do not have a shared language. Now we're talking about big age differences. When there's a big age difference, USCIS antennas go up for marriage fraud, and it is up to you to, again, show your work. That's really the answer to a lot of these red flags, is show your work. You have to be able to show USCIS that although there's a big age difference, This is how you built your relationship. This is what your relationship is based on. Um, you know, communication, how you met, if your family know about the relationship, all those things, how you live together, share expenses, basically portray yourself to the public as a married couple. USCIS is going to take those into consideration, but just know big age difference is already going to be a red flag that you will need to overcome with documentation, with showing your work, showing your relationship. I know some people, they're like, why do I have to show my relationship? Why do I have to show my work if I know my marriage is real? Because USCIS is not in your home. Okay, USCIS does not know what happens in your home, so they cannot um, assume that your marriage is real. So you have to show them that your marriage is real. They don't know that, you know, you two eat dinner every night together. You make sure that you're home at the same time so you can spend time together. You two like watching the same shows or things of that nature. So if those things are things in your relationship, those are things that USCIS doesn't know about and don't have a way of knowing about. They don't know that you're texting each other every single day before you got married, and while you're married, you're still texting and talking on the phone when you're not together. USCIS has no way of knowing those things unless you show them those things. So that is where showing your work really comes in handy, because when it comes to these red flags, you have to overcome it. So big age difference is the second red flag that USCIS can have to suspect that your marriage is fraudulent. Okay. The next one is different addresses. This is a big one because one of the requirements for, let's say, your spouse filing for you to get a green card is that you and your spouse live together if you are in the US, right? If both you and your spouse are in the US, there's an expectation that you live together. If your spouse is outside of the US, that's different, right? There's no expectation that the US citizen or the permanent resident is going to be living in that other country. That expectation is not there. That expectation is there if you two live in the same country. USCIS expects for you to live at the same residence. When they see different addresses, especially in documentation that you give them, big red flags. If they do like just a basic research on you and see that, they're living in two different states according to the basic background check. So how would USCIS even know that you are in different addresses? One, your documentation that you use to prove your relationship clearly shows that you two live in different addresses. That's number one. Okay. Number two, if one of you gets arrested or has any interaction with the police, that will show up on your FBI background check, and it's for a completely different address or even a different state than your marital home. So sometimes when people get arrested, they give a different address or they give a fake address because they don't want to actually, think that the police is going to follow up if it's the wrong address, or they give a different name. All those things, it's public record. So anytime you're arrested, fingerprinted, whether you're the U.S. citizen or the permanent, the U.S. citizen or the non-citizen spouse, this stuff comes up. USCIS can do a basic check, and it's not that difficult. Remember, it's the U.S. government. They have access to your records. They have more resources than you do to figure this stuff out. So I know in my law firm, we have a basic background check that we do where we are able to see all the addresses that's associated with our client, right? So especially the US citizen client. We're able to see what addresses are associated with that client, which means if I'm able to get that information, USCIS is able to get that information. Okay, so don't think that just because you didn't put it in your forms that it's not going to come up. Okay. Ooh, this is a great question. After biometric, does background check extend to countries of origin? It depends. Most of the time it does. So most countries have a shared um, criminal record system where they're able to share information with each other. So if your specific criminal record or anything like that is in that shared system, or your country participates in that shared system, it will come up. I've seen people that um, didn't disclose, they did the background check, and it shows up. The FBI background check is extensive. It can include Interpol records. And if the country shares information with the US, that can come up as well. So it is an extensive background check. It's not just whether you have committed a crime in the US, but if you have committed a crime in a country where they have this shared information with the US, that's going to come up. Okay, so always err on the side of disclosing the information to your lawyer before you file. Okay, if you know that you have any records that could come up that would be negative on your case, and it may be in the US, it may be outside of the US, you should be telling your lawyer that before you file. Okay, that's the most important part. You want to make sure you have that information before you file, because there are ways to either get the case reopened and dispose of in a way that it wouldn't be a problem for US immigration purposes. And we want to know that for an added reason, right? The added reason that we want to know that is if you came here on a visiting visa and you did not disclose that criminal record, that's going to affect you when you try to file through your spouse if the US government finds out about it and has that in their records, because that is misrepresentation. You didn't tell them the full truth about your background when they asked you plainly on that visiting visa application. Okay, and then when you're filing for a green card, they ask you again if you have ever been arrested, cited, charged in any country, not just in the US. And that's a mistake people make sometimes, is that they assume they're just talking about the US. No, it's for the entire world. Anywhere that you have ever been arrested is what they're talking about here. Okay, so just keep that in mind as you're going through this process. So thank you so much, Tomwell, for that question. It is something that I'm most likely going to do a whole video on how the background checks work and what actually goes into it. Now, the different addresses. So the red flag, third red flag is having different addresses. So like I said, background checks can find this out. Police reports are public records. If the officer does a basic check on what's available publicly, right? Anyone can get, anyone can usually get those records because they're public records and they are available to the US government, obviously. And if they look at those and either you or your spouse has been arrested or has records that are public that show that you don't live at the same address, or that you are presenting yourself as if you don't live at the same address, that's going to come back and bite you. Now, let me go even further. So people think we're just talking about criminal records. No, we're not just talking about criminal records. If you have a custody case, if you have a divorce, child support, all those cases, most of the time it's public records. depending on your state and the individuals involved, right? Juvenile records are not public, so those are, you have to specifically ask for it, and the court has to approve for you to have access to those. But family court records, as far as the complaint of saying, oh, I'm filing for child support, modification, contempt, you write your address. That's part of the process. So when you're doing your, when you're filling out the forms, they ask, where do you live? Where does the child live? Where does the person you're bringing to court live? All those things are shown on those forms, and all those things are public records. So if you are going through that process, just know all of that is public records that the US government can easily look up and see what you actually put in there, especially if it's clear from your forms that you have a child outside of your marriage, before your marriage. They will want to see if there's any custody or anything like that going on currently, or at least during your marriage, that shows a different address, or that shows information that's contrary to what you're telling them. This also goes for housing, okay? When you apply for housing benefits, just know some of those things are not private, okay? Your address, your spouse, all those things are not private. So they're able to see, if you're applying for housing benefits, are you including your spouse on those applications? Because those applications do ask, are you married? And if you say no, well, then you just lied to the US government. Now the officer is going to ask you, were you lying on the form, or are you lying to me today when you're telling me that you live with your spouse? Okay, so it's really important that as you're filling out those forms, as you're putting information out there that is public information, that you are truthful and not putting information out there that can hurt your relationship, especially when it comes to your addresses. Okay, and then the next red flag is keeping your marriage a secret. That is a red flag for USCIS. And I'll tell you what I mean by keeping your marriage a secret. So you and your spouse are married, living in marital bliss, but your spouse's parents, friends, family, no one knows that you're married. No one knows that you two are together even. That's a problem in the eyes of USCIS, because why are you not telling your family that you're married to this person? Again, everything that I'm talking about is stuff that can be overcome if you know that it's a red flag to start with, right? Because you may not be telling your family because you haven't spoken to your family in years, and you have a strained relationship, and you don't want them involved in your marriage, right? You don't have a relationship with your family, so they don't need to know that you're married. That is a good reason for keeping your marriage a secret from them. Okay, so it's really important that you keep that in mind as you're going through this process, and as you're listening to these red flags. It's not the end of the world if you have these red flags, but you need to know that they are red flags, so you know how to address it when it comes up. All right, so secret marriages, that's a huge red flag, so keep that in mind. The next and final red flag that I want to discuss with you all is having a child during your marriage that is not of your marriage. Okay? Having a child with someone else other than your spouse while you're married to your spouse. That is a huge, huge red flag for USCIS. And that's why I saved it for last. But again, it can be overcome. I have had this come up in cases, and we were able to overcome it with documentation. Again, show your work. Okay. So I'll give you an example of where this came up. We went to the interview, the officer asked, my client was honest about what led to the child having the child with someone else, how the spouse found out, all of that. Right, we were able to overcome it because one, my client was honest with me before we got to the interview, so we knew what to expect. Right, we knew that was going to be a problem. We already prepared the spouse for those types of questions so that they're not surprised or embarrassed when it came up. They were open to talking about it, which of course led to the USCIS officer approving the case, even with a child being had during the marriage with someone else. So it is so important that as you're listening to these red flags, that you know that it's not the end of the world if you have these red flags, but you have to be prepared to deal with these red flags. Okay? So, as always, ask me your questions because I really want to help you with these. If you're watching this on the replay, know that you can also ask questions. I'm happy to respond to you. And I'm just going to quickly go over all the red flags once again. So the first one is that you and your spouse do not have a shared language. You can overcome that by showing how you and your spouse actually communicate. So even though you don't speak the same language, you know, if you're communicating through Google Translate or some other apps or text, you should be showing that to USCIS so that they know that even though you don't have a shared language, you are still able to communicate with each other. Big age differences is the next red flag. If there's a big age difference, you want to really show your relationship, show your work, show your communication before your marriage, how you communicated, how you dated, how you're telling the world that you're with this person, and how you're building a life together. That's what USCIS is looking at there. Different addresses is the next red flag. If you are putting it out there or filling out forms showing a different address than your marital address, know that that's going to be a problem. USCIS has resources to be able to find this out. They can get information regarding your addresses in the US, outside of the US, information about you in the US and outside of the US in most situations. So keep that in mind as you're filling out forms or putting out information out there in the world. The next red flag is keeping your marriage a secret. USCIS assumes that when you're married, you want to share it with the world. However, if you're in a situation where you're not able to do that, show your work. Tell USCIS why you're not sharing your marriage with your family, with your friends. Maybe they're not supportive. And then why are they not supportive? What other ways are you able to show USCIS that you're putting it out there that you're not that your marriage is real? For example, if your marriage is secret from your family, but you're filing taxes together, but your you know, your spouse is your emergency contact person at your job, at your school, whatever it is, those are ways to show your work when it comes to the marriage. And then the last and final red flag that I want to discuss is the having a child outside of your marriage. That is a huge red flag that USCIS really wants a reasonable explanation for, and how you and your spouse worked through it. Okay, not just, oh well, yeah, they had a child with their ex and it's okay, I'm over it. But how did you work through it? How did that make your spouse feel? How did your spouse get over that big of a thing? And how are you building your relationship together? So even though you had a child outside of the marriage, you can still prove that your marriage is not fraudulent by showing your work, showing your communication, showing how you are sharing your life together. So all of that is how you can really overcome these red flags. Okay, so that is all I have for you today. If you have any questions about this or anything else, you can book a time to talk to me by going to my website, lilylegal.com, or by calling my office at 508-443-1788. Like I said, that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for taking the time. And remember, if you like this video, hit the like button. If you know someone who needs to hear this, please share this video with them. And if you're listening in a place where you can subscribe and you don't want to miss any of my uploads, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And once again, I am Lilian Chukura. I am the owner of Lily Legal, where we do immigration law and we do it well. Bye for now.